Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after this meeting. Can everybody please switch their microphone on when speaking and turn it off again when they've finished speaking? Incidentally, we may be joined later by Anne Carruthers, who sent her apologies for the beginning of this meeting, but hopefully Anne will be joining us later if she can. So let's get straight onto the agenda, if I may. The first item is the minutes of the meeting, which was held on the 24th of January 2024. It's on pages 5 to 10 of your packs. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Item number 2, I have received no questions from the public. Item number 3, I have received no questions from any members. Item number 4, I have not been notified of any urgent items this afternoon. Number 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any interest that they wish to declare? None, thank you. Item number 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with overview and scrutiny procedure rule number 16. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? Thank you. Item number 7, I've not received any presentation or petitions under standing order number 35, which brings us nicely to our first substantive item. It's a report on the recycling and household waste sites consultation outcome, recommendations and further consultation. This is on pages 11 to 86 of your agenda pack. Joe Guile, our Assistant Director for Environment and Waste, will present the report. So thank you very much for joining us, Joe. It's now over to you. Oh, incidentally, sorry, following the presentation, Mr. Payne, as lead member, if there's anything else you'd like to add, you'll be invited to do so. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, I'll also just say that Vicky Comey, my head of service, has dialed in remotely. She's also on the call for committee if she's actually coordinated a substantial part of both consultations. So if there are any detailed questions about that, she will be able to support. So through you, Chair, firstly, I think it's just right that officers acknowledge the detailed consideration that this committee's already given to proposals on changes to the running of the recycling household waste sites, both as part of the first round public consultation, which ran for 12 weeks between November and January of this year, and which this committee considered at its meeting in November of last year, but also more recently at the February meeting, where changes were considered and alluded to within the draft MTFS report, which went to Cabinet and Council in February last month, and has led to a second consultation on some revised proposals, which would see Market Harbour and Shepshed saved from closure, remaining open on a part-time basis, and some associated changes to the opening patterns at Kibworth to make that operationally viable. So this report seeks to address those two elements. The first one, the outcome of the first public consultation on the original proposals, and then secondly, set out the revisions that form part of the revised proposal and seek views from this committee whilst during that consultation phase. I wasn't going to propose to go over the previous decisions, though they do acknowledge the considerations mentioned earlier by this committee, as well as Cabinet and Council. Equally, the background section will be familiar information about the history of the current service. What I would do is refer members to the public consultation findings section, which is from point 14 of the report. That sets out how the first public consultation was undertaken, what engagement was carried out with key stakeholders such as the parishes and district councils and the Leicestershire Equalities Challenge Group, and then some further detailed focus group sessions, all of which formed part of that wider consultation process. The detailed findings have been appended to the report at Appendix B and C, but in outline, there was a really strong response from the online questionnaire with over 5,500 responses received. And the key findings are listed from point 18 in the report. But in essence, there was real strong opposition to site closures, particularly the Market Harbour and Shepshed site. And there were linked concerns about things like fly tipping impacts, future housing growth and displacement effects and pressure on other sites. There was arguably less concern about the reduced days on a permanent basis at Bottisford, which is currently 3 days anyway and has been for a prolonged period of time. There was broad support for the proposals to reduce the summer opening hours, certainly as an alternative to site closures, and there was very strong support for Christmas Eve closures across the network. Residents were also obviously given the opportunity to suggest alternatives, and they are covered in the report. In terms of focus group feedback, I think it's fair to say that we received sort of more detailed observations and comments as part of those, and suggestions around things like days, patterns for site opening, but broadly similar views to the wider questionnaire. And from the stakeholder comments that we received, they tended to be location specific. So if I give an example, Harbour District Council had concerns associated with the potential loss of the recycling house or waste site in their district area, and some concerns about traffic impacts that would happen at Kibworth if it were to go ahead. There were some concerns from neighbouring authorities outside the county about displacement impacts, pushing residents out of the county boundaries, and wider concerns about fly tipping, journey times, congestion and queuing. I just quickly pick up the point about traffic concerns and the road infrastructure around Kibworth. This was linked to if Market Harbour were to close and all of those visitors were displaced to that new site. During the first public consultation, the Waste Service commissioned a traffic impact assessment which looked at the viability of the right turn off the A6 as you come away from Market Harbour towards Kibworth. And we modelled peak, so if all the visits from Market Harbour in the height of summer and the busiest period were displaced to Kibworth, would the junction, would the right turn cope? And whilst it's expanded on in the report, the data suggests that the Kibworth site and that right turn could tolerate that kind of displacement. However, obviously, the latest proposals arguably create a betterment. So they reduce the displacement risk were Market Harbour's recycling house or waste site to stay open part-time, but that is expanded on in the report. This is probably just a good point to highlight the revised proposals then, which form part of the latest consultation, and as they are set out in the report. They take on board the results of the first consultation, and if eventually approved by Cabinet, they would see Market Harbour remain open part-time, 3 days as opposed to its current 5. Keep Shepshed open part-time also 2 days as opposed to its currently open 3. And we would have a corresponding reduction in the number of open days at Kibworth from 5 to 4 to make that all operationally viable with our staffing. As Somerby is still earmarked for closure, and the proposals associated with Bottisford, the summer opening hours and the Christmas Eve closures have not changed, they don't form part of the second consultation. And just to be clear, that second consultation started on the 21st of Feb and will run for 4 weeks. The resources section highlights the revised proposals and how they'll be funded. So they revised the annual saving from 300,000 as opposed to the original 400, and they're being delivered fully from 25-26 financial year. And these proposals have been incorporated into the latest MTFS. The report also addresses any Section 106 considerations in relation to the RHWS infrastructure. And so lastly, on the second consultation, which is from point 38 in the report, we're seeking the views of this committee, and our ambition as officers would be to analyse the results of both consultation findings when concluded and suggest that, subject to no major changes to those proposals, we would then present the final recommendations to Cabinet, hopefully in May of this year, with implementation starting from this coming October. And with that, Chair, I'll pause and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Firstly, can I please do excuse me, Vicky Cormie, for omitting you from my introductions earlier. Thank you for joining us, Vicky. Can I take members' questions, please? Councillor Page, thank you.
Thank you. I don't actually have a question. I just have a comment. First of all, I have got to say that I'm really delighted that we have got, well, several comprehensive reports in front of us now, which has really shown that this council hasn't just made a decision, they have actually worked at trying to get the right decision. I'm also really delighted that the consultation has been 12 weeks because, for instance, just as an example, in Harbour we're running a local plan which is really complicated on 6 weeks, and people on parish councils can't actually feed into that consultation in that time. And I think your response of 5,600 people really shows that it really had residents' comments on mind. And I think, having listened to what residents wanted, we are here now on a second report as such, or consultation rather, and it is a really good compromise. And I think it's a brilliant compromise. It's a good way forward. I was one who originally thought, well, let's close Kipworth rather than Harbour, but so much work has gone into substantiating and looking at the report on the opening hours and why and therefore. So I think it's a good compromise. I think officers got to be congratulated, and I have got no problems with this.
Thank you, Councillor Page. I agree. I think it's a comprehensive report. Remember, we've still got the 20th of March and the 24th of May, so nothing's conclusive yet. But I think it could be argued we are in a more favourable position this time. Last year we were looking at compromising 2 or 3 sites. At the moment we're only looking at compromising 1, and I'd like to thank the officers for some sterling work with that. Mr. Pay, is there anything you'd like to add?
Other than what's already been said, just to say that personally, thank you to, like you say, the officers. I think you've expressed the thanks of this committee to the officers for the work that they've done on the consultation, because it has been very thorough. But I just want to remind members that in an ideal world, we wouldn't have wanted to bring a consultation or a policy position last October to this panel to close any of the sites. But as we well know, our finances here at Leicestershire County Council, as every other upper tier, no doubt many other councils across the country, are very challenged at the moment. So we start the budget setting processes very early, and last June, even before June, May, we identified obviously this policy to be executed, hence why the scrutiny panel was involved. And if it were not for the government awarding the council £5 million worth of extra funding, it could have been that we'd have had to have executed the policy irrespective of the strong consultation. But as Mrs. Page has quite rightly pointed out, we're a council that listens. We don't just say that, we actually prove that in what we do. So I'm particularly proud that we've been able to listen to the very strong response of the consultation, which has been highlighted by our lead officer, Joe, here, and very pleased that we've been able to react to that positively. Of course, it still requires, if you like, a diminution of operating hours, particularly at Kibworth. Hence, we've had to reconsult on that, and that consultation is still live. But by and large, as you've identified, Chairman, we're in a very balanced position, and Mrs. Page said it's a good compromise, and I concur with her remarks there. So thanks to all involved, and thank you for hearing the resolutions of the initial consultation here today.
Thank you, Mr. Payne, lead member. Any more comments from any of the members? Mr. Hunt.
I hear what everybody says, and I go along with that. We have met the target, and there's been a compromise and so forth. One of the features of this, though, is that once again, it's the government finding some money, as it were, under the proverbial sofa and handing it, 5 million here, perhaps 3 million for buses next week, or whatever it might be. But these are kind of just shocks to the system, which we will have to cope with eventually. And I have the feeling that there's a large sort of political element to this, and that's no way to run a county council in the end. We need at least 3-year budgets to rely on. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Bolter, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'll echo what the member said. It's a good compromise. However, whatever with Somerby, and what's going to happen to Somerby if Cabinet go along with this and Somerby does close? What happens to the site? Can we answer that, or is that something to come down the line later on?
Thank you. First, I'm going to go to our officer, Joe. Thank you. Would you like to respond to Councillor Bolter? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is the project that I chair that's been overseeing the work behind the scenes operationally, if Cabinet agree with the latest round of proposals and Somerby is earmarked for closure, at a really functional level, the service will spend the period between now and October carrying out the HR action plan, looking at whether we can avoid any redundancies, redeploying staff to other locations and so on. And at the point of closure, we'll then have a period of months where we will make good the site. So in terms of its security, we will reallocate some of the assets that are on that site. So if there's containers, they'll be redistributed around the network so that we can use them in other locations to optimise that. And thereafter, we will engage with the corporate colleagues in strategic property, because in effect, in layperson's term, the service will declare that asset no longer required for the purposes of running the waste service, and then corporately our property colleagues will ascertain if that site is mothballed, is retained, is sold, is repurposed. But from the purpose of me as the Assistant Director for Waste, if we're not using it for that purpose, it will be offered back and be one of the listed assets of the council. But at the moment, the project does not have within its scope a defined it will mothball it for 12 months or so on and so forth. But I certainly will actually take on board that point as to whether we should be writing something into the Cabinet report that secures a decision from Cabinet about any exactness of what happens to it thereafter.
Happy with the response, Mr. Bolter? Thank you. Just before I go to Councillor Harrison, Joe, you spoke about redeployment of the containers. I'm certainly not trying to get you into the corner on this, but would that also would there be consideration to redeployment of the staff in the similar way?
Without disclosing any sort of details, because obviously the staff are directly impacted, but we have engaged with the staff. The ambition will be that because we have such a high level of vacancies across our service, and some of that is filled by agency, there is absolutely the opportunity for any staff that are at risk in their permanent location, in this example, be it Somerby, that they would be offered the opportunity to be redeployed to another location. But we will work with our HR colleagues to make sure that the exactness of how we support the staff through that process is fully adhered to.
It's not holding you to any accountability, so potentially there's costs. It could be argued there's cost savings by redeploying the staff and not using agency staff in the future.
It's ultimately more about supporting the staff. We would absolutely rather have our well-trained, long-standing members of staff retained within the service, but we have a service that is always dependent on a certain amount of agency. So it's not to underplay the importance of agency. You know, we resource to a base position, but when we go into summer, we have a peak that is disproportionate. So we always rely on additionality to sort of secure that extra busy period through the summer. So the service is made up of both elements, but what we wouldn't do is put people at risk where there's an opportunity for them to be reallocated within the assets that we have.
Thank you. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the entire committee by saying that we do appreciate the valued work that agency staff do. Councillor Harrison, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by very briefly just thanking the officers. It's a splendid report. There's great initiatives there. At the beginning, we thought we were facing extreme difficulties. We found ways of overcoming that, hopefully. and that's on its way, and we are involved in consultations. So any other comments, we've got to wait for this to happen now. So what I would say respectfully, Mr. Chairman, we are advised to note, and which I'd offer to say, let's agree with that and to move on. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Any concluding notes on this agenda item, colleagues, please? Councillor Seaton, thank you.
I have a question because it'll just plague me if I don't ask the question. It's got nothing to do with the content, really. It's the questionnaire, and it was so successful, the questionnaire, because it was focused and obviously very important to a lot of people. But the anomaly that you've got there from the respondents to the population on 45 to 75s, that you've got double the respondents of 64%, whereas the Leicestershire population of that age was 32%. So I wondered, can you come to any conclusions on that at all?
The short answer, through you, Chair, is I would have to ask Vicky Cormie if we've made any observations in the working group that's led on the consultation. And sorry, Vicky, to put you on the spot, but have we picked up any issues either from our corporate colleagues about just the demographic and sort of any information that you'd add to that?
Not specifically, and I would have to go and check, but I suspect that it's reflective of the people that are using the sites, the sort of demographics of the site users as compared to the population of the county as a whole. I don't have those specific statistics to hand. I would have to look for them, but that is what I suspect that it is probably.
Thank you. I know that these are just headlines and you've got all the age groups down there, and I haven't looked on those, but I just wondered whether it was a reflection that consultations that the younger population do not engage in these consultations. They engage in using the tip. I've seen them, and young people use the tip just as much as middle-aged and older people. So it's that consultation again of getting to the younger population. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Seaton. I personally think it's a remarkable response for a survey, I'll say. I think it's incredible that you actually got that amount of emotive response. It's good effort. I don't know what you did or how they were incentivised to fill the forms in, but I'm not a great survey responder myself. I have to. Councillor Payne, thank you.
Yeah, I think in reality, the particular strong response in that age group from 45 to 75, 65, 75, there's probably a strong correlation between ownership and that particular age group. I have no doubt that younger people do use the tips, but in terms of the strength of the response overall, I think there's a lot of strong campaigning led by members of Parliament in the respective areas, which obviously engendered a great interest in this issue. However, the responses came in, we welcomed the responses, and I maintain I'm very pleased that we've been able to listen and respond accordingly to what the respondents were telling us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I suggest we adopt that methodology in other surveys we conduct from the council, because it was obviously quite effectual. Colleagues, are we confident to move on to the next agenda item? Okay, so in the absence of Anne Carruthers, I'm going to turn our attention once again to the very erudite Joe to take us through the next agenda item, which is number 9, and that's the Environment and Climate Change Performance Report to December 2023. This is on pages 87 to 100 of your agenda pack, and in Anne's absence, as I say, it will be led by Joe. So over to you, Joe, and also once again, Councillor Payne, as lead member, if there's anything you'd like to ask or add at the end of the discussion, you'll be given opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just introduce Nicola, who has come to previous committee meetings, Chair.
Nicola, how very rude. I apologise. We also welcome Nicola Truslove. Thank you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
It's because I cannot steal the thunder. Nicola produces this report. It's not me or Anne, but we'll do our best to put the gloss across the top, Chair. So this performance report is for the period up to December of last year, December 2023. And for this reporting period, 16 of the 25 performance indicators have been updated. Obviously, as with previous reports, I'd propose to only pick out the indicators where there's been anything more than a marginal change. So the first one I think to highlight is the excellent progress on tree planting, with an increase from just under 250,000 trees to just over 350,000 trees in that period. So that puts the authority well on target with this indicator of arguably 70,000 trees per annum. So even for the first 2 years, we're way over that 140,000 tree target to date. Obviously, and it's not just an action that the County Council is recognised for, but many organisations and groups across the county. So that's reflecting also that really substantial, strong engagement with partners. Next, the annual percentage of municipal waste to landfill continues to improve with a drop from 23% to 21%. And this performance, however, still leaves us in the 4th quartile compared to other authorities. But we will see a shift over time as more waste transitions to non-landfill disposal points that we have procured from the market. And we have a target within the Leicestershire Resources and Waste Strategy, which is the joint strategy with the districts, to try and achieve less than 5% by 2025. So a really ambitious target over the next few years. The total household waste per household has declined in performance, with a slight increase from 939 kilograms per household to 954. And this one puts us in the 3rd quartile, but I would argue if you look at the trend data, it's generally flat. It's a small change, but it's still generally flat. The percentage of waste recycled from LCC sites has declined, going from just under 55% to 51%, while the overall tonnage of waste from LCC sites has decreased. So arguably that one is improving in performance in terms of the tonnage we're reducing. So there's less waste, but arguably the corresponding challenge is there's also less recycling of that waste. There can be many reasons, such as the composition of the waste, changes in building occupancy will be at play, less use of paper, and we're no longer composting food waste at County Hall at the moment. As you'd hope, EV charging locations per 100,000 of the population is continuing to improve. And that's increased to 46.5, as is EV ownership, although both of these are below the norm and they're in quarters 3 and 4. There's lots of work ongoing on EV charging infrastructure, and our approach to supporting this is set out in paragraphs 27 and 28. Lots of activity in that area. We've seen a reduction in the amount of renewable energy generated as a percentage of consumption, and that's dropped from 14.5% to just under 11%. And this will, at least in part, have been due to the upgrading of the biomass boiler, and we had some mechanical and supply chain issues that were related to that, so it slightly affected that performance. And the last one I'd pick out is the County Council's greenhouse gas emissions. They're continuing to drop, and we're now under that 10,000 tonnes of carbon. And this report, this scrutiny meeting had a really detailed greenhouse gas report in January, which covered that whole section in more detail. However, our business miles have increased, but they're certainly very much still under those pre-pandemic levels. So that just shows the service change in how we're running services. And with that, Chair, I'd suggest that they are the highlights, and I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. In Anne Carruthers' absence, I think you delivered that very well. It would appear to me that it's a favourable over adverse report. I think it's very well written, and I think there's far more good news stories falling out of that than negative ones. Councillor Page, thank you.
Thank you. Quite a few questions, if I may, please, and that's not really on the outcomes or the report, because as the chairman just said, that's quite positive and it's a great report. It's just generally to get my head around this. So, for instance, here it goes, question number 1. Is this report just a snapshot of the indicators, or are there is that all of the indicators as set out in the appendix? So then my next question is, now for instance, the trees, item 20, I appreciate that's a local indicator we set because it was a local initiative. But I'm not sure then which of the others are statutory ones. For instance, is the electric vehicle one we've set a local indicator, or is that a statutory indicator? Now, if I'm going to the page 97, where I see the dashboard, I know it says that there is a little dash somewhere, little asterisk. Yeah, indicator, statutory returns. And then I see only on page 98, there are little asterisks on the first three. So do I then assume that only those three are statutory indicators? Yeah, follow what I'm asking. Yeah, and all the rest are actually local indicators we have set and we monitor on. So then with that comes my next question. Do we, only got two more, do we ever look at our indicators and evaluate them? You know, as a portfolio holder, do we really need this? Or don't we need this? What's the point of this? Because sometimes we monitor things, and we spend money on that, but, we might not want it anymore, or it's pointless. So question is, do we review our local indicators? Because I'm fully well aware that statutory ones we've got to do. And my last question, so say for instance, as you know, I'm also a district councillor, but so if I'm at my district council, I go into, we have a system called Pentana, and I go into that, right? And I go into my little section and I look under Councillor Blake Payne, his portfolio, and I see all the indicators that are under his portfolio. And then I can see, that one is red, that one is yellow. And then I can say, Councillor Payne, why is that red and yellow? Now here I've only got 2 pages. So how can I, right, if I'm a really, really keen councillor, look into the overall of his portfolio? How can I get into this? Does that make sense? If I wanted to sit at home on my computer and see what performance indicators altogether sit under your portfolio and want to scrutinise them, how can I do that? Thank you. And I'm done.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Rarely are the questions longer than the report summary. But, I feel like I've had 2 reports. Who would like to respond to Councillor Page, or in part, or in you? It's quite within your rights to share it amongst you if you so much.
I think. Sorry, Chairman.
Thank you.
I think there's actually some very good points, I think, that was raised in there. In terms of how do members or anybody else for that matter access performance metrics, indicators on behalf of the portfolio, I'm going to leave to Nicola, to respond to. And on the other points that are raised regarding, the general indicators, I think Joe will probably like to come in, but then I'm going to finish it off after I've heard them both speak with my own views as to, how regularly do we oversee the indicators and how relevant maybe they are to the actual portfolio at hand.
Thank you. There you go, Councillor Page. You get a 3-part harmony response to this one.
Officers wouldn't like it if they'd write all of these long reports and we wouldn't give them due credit.
I'll leave the officers to respond to that. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I know Councillor Page will tell me if I've missed anything, and I am going to lean on Nicola a little bit. But just on the first point about, is the report a snapshot of all the indicators? If I just reiterate that in the sort of background to the report, it does acknowledge that well, one in how I presented it. I'm just looking at the ones that are more than marginal change. So, you know, of the 25, I only concentrated on 16. And then even of those, I've only picked out the ones where we've got big swings. So the report is just a sort of filtering of that, though the report does have all of the information in it. And just to expand on that, some of the reporting frequencies to inform why we give you the update that we do will be linked to how often we get the data. So sometimes we'll get that data quarterly, sometimes it might be annually, it might be every other year. So our ability to give you a more updated position is linked to the frequency with which we get the data. Hence, we bring this report regularly, and some will be ahead or behind just in terms of our ability to secure the data and present it. So hopefully, when you put those two things together, what you're certainly seeing is the big swings, but all of the information in the background, as we get it, we update them of the whole suite of indicators. On the, you gave the example, I think, with your next question about trees, and then you went on to one of the page 97, 98, and the thing about the asterisks. I was just going to bring Nicola in at that point, just to articulate, you know, the ones where they're sort of locally generated or statutory.
Hi everyone, thanks. Some really good questions there. The asterisk really is about statutory indicators that we're required to report on. We also identify our indicators by those that are county-wide and those that are internal, so local, and we put that on the right-hand side column. So you kind of get an idea of what data is coming through within the organisation and what is coming through externally from other, from government departments potentially as well, or other partners. So hopefully that answers that question.
Not quite.
Okay.
If I may come back, please, because I think it's really important. If we are monitoring performance, I think we really need to know what we're actually doing, because otherwise this whole exercise is pointless. Okay, so if I can go back to page 98. So those three indicators are actually only the statutory ones, and they've got the little asterisks. So then if you're giving us the latest data and then previously reviewed, but it doesn't, for me as a layman, it would be nice to know, as Joe just said, how often they have to be monitored. And then I don't understand. Just talk me through it. I don't quite get it. It says they're all Q1, but then the tons of waste, it's Q4, and then the recycled stuff is Q4. So surely it should be Q1 monitoring, Q2 monitoring, 3 and 4. I don't get my head around this.
Sorry, within the period column, we put in when that data went up to. So, for example, the reuse, recycling, composting, the latest data we have for that is Q1 22-23. So that's 2 quarters in arrears. And then when we look at the tons of waste produced from LCC sites, at the moment that's 3 quarters in arrears. So that's why it's Q4 22-23. So that column is literally telling you when we had that latest data.
Councillor Page, can I ask you to put your microphone on, please, Nikki?
Free. So, thank you, Chairman. So does that does then mean to me that the performance I'm measuring is not up to date and it's not correct? Because if you don't have and look at the performance altogether, you don't get an overall picture of the whole year. So how do you square that, Nicola?
The way we square that is at the end of the financial year, we put all the data relevant to that year into the annual report, and that comes through on the performance compendium of the annual report. So that's how we square that. But this particular report is literally the latest data that we have. And unfortunately, because a lot of the environment data does have huge differences. It's not like some of the other departments, unfortunately, where it's all quite recent. There are significant lags, some of them up to 2 years.
If I could just, sorry, I'll let Nicola turn her mic off. And I suppose all I'd add to that is you're seeing a live picture. So you're right, what you're seeing is horses in a race with different quarterly bits of data, and some you only get that annually, but you do get a very live picture with the latest with every quarter. As Nicola said, at the point that a year closes and then eventually all of those quarters catch up, there will be a log for that preceding year. Even if it's 6 months into the next financial year, you close off the preceding year because every quarter is caught up, and then that's recorded and retained by the authority, a little bit like the annual environmental performance report and the greenhouse gas report. When they are eventually fully secured, we lock them in and we submit them, whether they're to various government bodies, etc., and you can go back. So this, I accept, is interesting because it's giving you lots of live data, some statutory, some localised, but eventually they will all catch up, and then you record a point in time for the year that you've closed. Just on the other point, because I'm conscious that you did ask some other things around. I'll let Blake come in if he wants to on, do we look at indicators and reevaluate them? I mean, the short answer, allowing for Blake anything that he might add, is we explore adding new indicators or taking them away on a cyclical basis, you know, on the basis of need. So if something comes along and we think actually we've included things in the report that Nicola produces, things that we're not necessarily in control of, but are valuable local intelligence and information that give a sense of sort of the scale or of ambition or what's happening locally within Leicestershire, even if we're not in control of that indicator, and we differentiate. And Councillor Payne sometimes asks us for more or less on fly tipping or whatever it is that we've added and removed indicators over the years. And the only other thing I'd add is you did mention on one of your questions, your last question, I think, about could you go on the website and look under Councillor Blake Payne and what's all of the indicators? I mean, I'm speaking for Councillor Payne. I think your portfolio is fairly substantial and cuts across all the departments. So the indicators, by definition, they fall across property services or trees or environment and transport. I would argue we don't have an internet toggle where you could look at just Blake's indicators. But what we do have is a hierarchy of indicators. So this report is specific to the strategic plan indicators and outcomes, and that's the report that you receive, and it does eventually catch up when you get an annual performance. But within my service, there are lots and lots of further indicators, some at team level, some at group level. So you get a hierarchy of lots of different indicators for different purposes. So we produce all the waste indicators and we submit them to a government body to validate them. So every tonne of waste that moves around the county that will inform these indicators goes through a sort of technical route. But for the purposes of this committee, we put it under the hierarchy of the strategic plan, and where Blake's portfolio captures anything under those relevant topic areas, you get it in this report to this committee.
So hang on. So if you halfway through the year, if you spot that an indicator to you flags up that it is red, so you then address it internally, adjust it, and then by the time we get the, so internally when there are discrepancies already, rather than waiting till the end of the year. Yeah.
We will know if something's red, but just to be clear, Chair, we don't change the indicator to make it green within the year.
You will try to address it. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. As respectfully, as the lead member was referenced many times, Councillor Payne, is there anything you'd like to add before I take questions from Mr. Bolter and the very patient Councillor Chapman as well? Thank you.
Yeah, the only indirect response to the questions raised by Councillor Page, how frequently do we take a look at this? Now, as far as I'm aware, it feels like at least every quarter at lead member meetings we'll probably have a report on the performance, if you will, of the overall environment and green agenda here at Leicestershire County Council. And that's been the case for some years now, certainly since I've been lead member. There have been some changes in some of the indicators I note throughout that time. But one of my frustrations, I think Nicola will bear reference to this and testament to some of my complaints in that I get very frustrated that some of these indicators are beyond the control of the Leicestershire County Council. And we'll start off just with the percentage of domestic properties with energy performance certificate rating C+ on new dwellings. Well, the County Council doesn't permit new residential dwellings. Planning authorities do that. It's incumbent on planning officers and planning committees to make sure that developers are making sure that the properties that are being built, etc., are being built with, energy efficiency in mind, etc. But obviously, their decision making then feeds into this particular metric. We'll take another section, Leicestershire Rivers. Now, yes, it's very useful to sit on the balcony here at Leicestershire County Council and have an understanding of what's happening out there on the dance floor in Leicestershire. But quite frankly, we have a very small role to play in terms of getting utility companies and an environment agency, etc., to take action in whatever way on these metrics. But yet we're reporting them, and it's here listed as a key performance indicator. Councillor Page says, how do we hold Councillor Payne to account? Well, they look at the KPIs, but I haven't got control over what the Environment Agency or Severn Trent or the utility companies. That said, it's really important for us here as a county council to understand what's going on. So I suspect the reason why it's included in our suite of indicators is that we've got some understanding of what it's like on the ground in Leicestershire. But to be held to account for that is very difficult, and I get very frustrated. Similarly with EV charging, electric vehicle charging per 100,000 population. Again, we have a strong role to play. We have a Highways and Transport Department that will apply for the grants, etc. And at some level, we get to make decisions with other organisations, including borough district councils, etc., where charging points go. But the reality is there's a problem within the electric vehicle market at the moment. And I'm not sure if many people are aware, but a lot of capital write-offs and incentives are being offered up to company directors, etc. And it's those type of people that tend to own these electric vehicles, but access to electric vehicles more generally is very costly for the average citizen, not least in Leicestershire. So one metric, we're asked to increase the ownership, but we don't have the control, say, that the Treasury or the government do to be able to offer the incentives needed to allow people to acquire an electric vehicle. And similarly, the market around electric charging, it's all very well putting charging points in, but they get ran by external organisations, and often VAT and other costs are associated, which makes it very hard and expensive to charge your car externally rather than doing it at home. And then there's another question about using EVs for general long-range distance driving. So there's all sorts of issues there that are beyond our direct control as councillors or here at Leicestershire County Council, but yet seemingly we're going to be held to account over. So you can sense that I do have a degree of frustration about some of the metrics, but indeed I do appreciate that we need some of this data to understand what's going on more generally across Leicestershire.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I think it could be argued some of the questions there are bigger than we are. Councillor Bolter, thank you.
Thank you. Blake's answered it in part, but I'm intrigued why on page 89, only 99% of new houses meet the new energy thing, because they're all built to the building regulations. So how come 1% doesn't? So that needs to be referred back to another body, I believe. The other one I've got is on page 89 again, item 12, 9 below average. The council performs below average on 9 indicators in the 3rd or 4th quartile, listed in the appendix.
Sorry,
anything you'd like to add, Mr. Bolter?
I'd like to know what we're doing about the 9 that don't meet the high enough standard.
Thank you, Councillor Bolter. Joe, thank you.
Through you, Chair, I think recognising without maybe a specific, those where we are, for example, I'll give the one that's close to my heart, percentage of waste sent to landfill, we're in the 4th quartile. In terms of what are we doing, it took us 3 years to award a contract for residual waste that is non-landfill. And in the early years of that contract, we've only had it in place for a year. we will increasingly put tonnages through it that will move waste away from landfill, and we've got this ambition to get the amount of waste landfill down to 5%. I think the tricky issue with that indicator is we have hugely reduced it. We were in the 30-something percent, 30, 35%, and we're at 21 or 22. That's a really big move away from landfill of, you know, tens and tens of thousands of tons on the ground. But to get out of the fourth quartile, I think we've got to get to somewhere like 7% to landfill. So we have been a county area for whatever reason historically that has merchanted with the market, and we've measured financial metrics and environmental ones and have a level of reliance on landfill because there wasn't an alternative that was economically viable, though we did take a shareholding in Coventry, an incinerator. So we've been on a long journey to move waste out of landfill. But it isn't something you can just say, well, next year we'll move all of our waste from landfill to somewhere else. They take years to move, and we have done that. We've done the legwork to move that indicator, and we have an ambition that over the next few years it will substantially improve. What's really difficult for me is all of that work, we still have to get below 7%. Almost margin between 7 and 5 could take us between the fourth quartile and potentially the first or second very, very quickly, but we just won't move out of the fourth quartile for a really long time. So if I give that as an example, we are looking at those indicators where we have control or they're statutory or they're a burden placed on us directly as a disposal authority or as the council to try and move that trajectory away from being in the fourth quartile. But that isn't always something that you can do quickly or that isn't costly. So you have to consider that in terms of where we direct our efforts.
That's all about your other 8.
Sorry, Chair, I'd have to look at the report to look through.
Can I also just remind all members and everyone in the committee that Joe's doing a sterling job of standing in for Anne here, and I think you've done very well to come to bat at short notice and respond to some of these inquiries. So, Joe, if you can, I'm quite happy for you to answer one of the questions. Or actually, Joe, Councillor Bolter has requested that this could be actually a written response rather than taking any more time in here.
Through you, Chair, can I just clarify? So the question is, what is the department doing on the 9 indicators that are not on, that are red, did you say? Sorry, the red indicators, if we could give you a written response in terms of sort of expanded response on what we're doing with those indicators.
And I think Nicola alluded to the fact that some clarity might come out of the compendium that's being published at the end. Is that right, Nicola?
Yes. So it's usually in August where we really start getting to grips with that, and I think it's usually produced at about September time. So that will have the look back of on the year. But I think looking at the quartiles, there are obviously some fourth quartiles here, and they probably do need looking at some point in terms of a written response. So I think there are though some areas that have actually improved. So the quartiles for the percentage of domestic properties with energy performance certificate rating C+, that's actually now dropped into top quartile, which was something that there's quite a lot of work going on, and there was numerous partnerships alongside what LCC was doing, and that is in the report, but it is worth flagging that element up as well, which has already been.
Thank you. I think the whole committee would agree we'd rather have a written and considered response than try to field it here. I do need to
facilitate that through you, Chair. Just
thank you.
Sorry, this is just for my own clarity, though I'm sure Anna I'll check in with when we write up the minutes. It's just to check with Councillor Bolter. Sorry, I potentially said red, but I think you originally were talking about third and fourth quartile. So indicators that fall into the third and fourth quartile, what are we doing with those to get them on an upward trajectory?
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bolter. Thank you, Joe. I'd like to just turn now to very patient Councillor Chapman. Sorry, it's taking so long, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to seem very simple compared to those.
Good.
The vehicle charging points per 100,000. I know it's totally out of our control. Two parts to the question. Does that include domestic ones at people's properties who have got electric vehicle chargers involved? And if so, do the planning authorities inform you with the new regulations of all the new chargers going into new buildings that they're actually going in? If that makes sense. I think that's quite
perfect sense. Very succinct. Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Who would like to?
I'll have a go. Paragraph 28 of the report probably covers all that off, Mr. Chapman. It talks about the analysing the results of the county-wide EV survey. It speaks about us working with the districts and borough councils and businesses and other parties. In response to your first question, the actual charging points, yes, we have a degree of control because we apply for the grants that enable us to put some of these charging points in, but we're not the only body doing this. It's just that there is a programme within the Transport Department at the moment, Oz's department, where they're seeking to identify suitable places to put about, is it £1 million worth of EV charging points in? So that works ongoing, and I've asked for a report to be brought to me along with Ozzy when they've concluded that piece of work.
Joe, thank you.
And just to add to what Councillor Payne said, just on the, per 100,000, just that exactness of what that indicator is measuring. It comes from the National Charge Point Registry, but it's looking at the public database, the government database of publicly funded charge points. So your question about domestic charge points won't be in that publicly funded that Councillor Payne was alluding to. Okay.
Thank you. I'm happy to take two more questions unless there's anything that can't be explicitly addressed in the compendium that we keep referring to. Firstly, I'm going to refer to Councillor Page. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got, well, two more questions actually. Now, with councils are going to have to collect food waste statutory, will that then go into our indicators of household waste sent by local authorities for reuse on page 98, or do we have to measure it? How do we have to measure it? And maybe can we have some updating on it as a committee at one point later on to the committee? Because I don't know. I know the district's got to collect it, but I don't know how it will affect them, us. Are there any interrelation? Does it go into our performance indicators? And my other question is on page 90. We have got a whole section here of hectares of LCC land and better management for nature, which was updated, and it's seen another 10 hectares, etc., etc. But I read it, I get it, but I don't actually know what's behind it. So, where do we have this land? What land does it? Do we just set it aside and, how do we manage it? Why do we measure it? Why are we doing it? Just give me a little bit more fat on those bones, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. What we can't answer immediately, I'm sure that we'll be happy to receive in writing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. On the first point about the food waste and the statutory rollout, the short answer is yes, we will have to report it under the what is classed as NI 192, so the one that shows percentage recycled, composted, etc. All of the performance on food waste will go into that performance percentage. Yes, so we will capture all of the data on food waste with our district colleagues, and it will ultimately enhance that indicator from we're in the 40%, but whatever happens with food waste will go into that performance indicator with an improving picture is the plan. Just on your secondary element of that first point about, where are we at with food waste? Could the committee at some point have some extra information? We already have on the forward plan a paper that's coming this side of the summer, I believe, which will give be linked to a previous request, which is a summary of what is going on with it's called the collection and packaging reforms. So it's a suite of measures, but it will include, so what is going to happen with sort of food waste rollout, what's happening with a number of big legislative waste changes. As I understand, I will double check whether the food waste element is in that report, but it is one of the reports that the committee has asked for. So if it doesn't fully cover it when it's considered, you can always come back and ask officers to expand on it. On the second point, better land managed for nature. The only thing I will add is my disclaimer will be I will go away and ask the officer that pulls together that information for that indicator if he can just expand on what it means. But I know it is an indicator that we produced in the absence of some of the big changes that are coming in terms of sort of nature. So if I give two examples, one is the biodiversity duty, which is a statutory duty, and it has a biodiversity reporting duty. So without over articulating it, it may well be that at some future point that will supersede our local indicator on the nature indicator, because we wanted something to try and monitor progress, but we know that the biodiversity duty is coming. So potentially that will enhance and articulate in more detail what we need to report on. The other is the local nature recovery strategy, and that is a mandatory document that we as the lead authority for Leicestershire, Rutland and Leicester City have to produce, and that will come before this committee to set out what the local nature recovery strategy is, how it links in with improving biodiversity. It links in with things like biodiversity net gain and planning. It's quite a substantial shift. And we are the lead authority regionally that will have to produce it. We will have to go out to publicly consult on that, and we will come here to set that out for this committee. It will be on the forward plan within this year. So it will hopefully add a lot of detail that hasn't come before the committee yet, but hopefully will help answer some of those questions. But I will still take away the indicator as it stands today and see if I can get you an expansion.
Councillor Payne, if I can just hold you for one moment, I'm very appreciative of Councillor Hunt's patience. Thank you, sir. I apologise. So Councillor Hunt did have an interim question. Thank you.
Just a quick one. So paragraph 22, you covered it, Joe, partly in response to Mr. Bolter. And I've corresponded with you about this dichotomy between handling residual waste in the burner or in the ground, and I don't quite understand why it takes too long to move from one to the other, whether it's a matter of contracts, whether it's a matter of comparative costs, because there's a cost to and other charges to landfill, but there's also a cost to the incinerator. I'd imagined, because we have now in Leicestershire a wonderful new incinerator, that it would all be diverted overnight, and the lorries would be said, no, don't go down there. Go up to Loughborough, get rid of it, or Jepshed, give it there. So that's where I am with that one, and if more information can be provided in a written way, I'd be delighted too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Very tempted to use the phrase "here's the cavalry," but I didn't. And your timing is absolutely impeccable, and it would be totally unreasonable to ask you to try and contribute to the debate before, if we like, if we're in agreement, if item 9, environment and climate change performance report, perhaps we can have some closing remarks from Councillor Payne, unless there's anything absolutely imperative or urgent from anybody in the room.
Chair, if I just can on Councillor Hood's question, and I'm happy to sort of take the exactness of whatever the question was, but and we have corresponded on it. The short answer is no, you're correct. We can't just award one contract for a big incinerator and then move all our waste there. And that is deliberate. We have an agreement, our 2016 Cabinet report set out how we will manage residual waste as a county council into the medium term. Medium for waste could be 10, 15 years. That principle is to merchant with the market. There are safety measures in merchanting with the market. The facility at Newhurst has one single moving grate, and if that facility were to go offline, I still need to know that I can manage the residual waste in the county. The cabinet has took a decision, so we have a shareholding in Coventry. We send a percentage of waste. I would not be able to bring, apologies, to committee the exactness of the content of those contracts because they are commercially sensitive in how they are designed, and the exactness of how we plan the waste throughputs and the costs under those contracts. But we do merchant, and we think about how we deploy the waste and where it goes. And that also links to conversations we have to have with the district, and by agreement where it's appropriate to send them. The topmost corner of the county, we might not send to Coventry because it's the disproportionate distance for them to travel in small vehicles, so we would bulk up. So there is a major mechanism around how we utilize the assets that we have as outlets, and you can't incinerate everything. You have to still have landfill. There will always be landfill, so we will never get to a point where there is no landfill at all.
Councillor Hunt, please forgive me. I wasn't sure whether you were making a statement or asking a question earlier. I hope you didn't think I moved on without giving you prevalence of a response. It was about the immediacy of transferring the to the Loughborough incinerator, I believe.
Just in a nutshell, what you're saying is it's about contracts, and if it's about contracts, there's contract on the construction of the incinerator and so on. It's partly therefore a matter of balancing risk, and it's about risk, and whether we are being too generous with risk, or whether we can, in our financial situation, take on a bit more risk is a question which is probably interesting. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. And concluding remarks from our lead member.
3 points, Chairman. Firstly, I think Joe alluded to it earlier. It's so cross-cutting, this portfolio. To ask any detailed question in any particular area of the officers, in this particular case, Joe, that's sitting next to me, is a really tall ask. May I suggest on the nature and local environment and the questions that have been quite rightly identified by Councillor Page around hectares of land, etc. Maybe you consider putting that on as an agenda item at your scrutiny agenda setting meetings with the other lead members from the other groups, because I think it will require a representative from property, from our ecology department, and some other specialists to brief members who might be interested about this, and maybe to look at it holistically as a whole. Secondly, let's not forget, this is, if you like, it's not a monitoring report entitled, but this is a report up to December 2023. It's retrospective. It is looking back. We pull this data together in the annual compendium. And what I'm particularly pleased about this time is actually members have engaged in a debate, because the reason we have performance monitoring is to do just that, is to look where we are at any point in time. And we do this quite routinely, I think, every quarter, and that pleases me. And finally, it's a very good report. We're doing very, very well as a county council. Joe just alluded to the LCC better management of land. That's an indicator in this instance that we have introduced locally, and it's a good indicator for us to understand what we're doing to improve the ecology and the betterment of nature on our land. And that's just one example of many where we're getting it right. We're serious about the green agenda at Leicestershire County Council, and I thank members for their interest in this whole agenda and the report before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I can say on record that we will be submitting your recommendations to make sure that we do get that information put forward as something that we do in our agenda planning. So thank you. More formally, thank you, Anne, for joining us this afternoon. Unfortunately, it's back to Joe. Well, fortunately, so you've done a lot of talking this afternoon, Joe. I think we all owe you one. Our last item on the agenda, agenda number 10, if you will, is revised approach for charging for construction and demolition waste at household waste recycling centres. And this is on pages 101 to 106 in the agenda pack. Joe is going to talk us through this. Can I just say, incidentally, before I actually take any comments or questions from any members in the room, I am going to go directly to Councillor Blake Payne, lead member, for any additions that he would like to make to the commentary that Joe's just about to provide. So over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is final report from me this afternoon, and it looks to set out for scrutiny the revised approach to accepting construction and demolition waste from households at the council's recycling household waste sites following the government's legislative change, which came into effect at the start of January this year, and replaces and amends the council's existing charging policy, which has been in place since 2015. So the background to the report acknowledges that this committee received a report in September of last year on the potential impacts of this government change when they were in consultation, and the need for a regulatory change, so a change to law if they were committed to bringing it into effect. The report also clarifies what services we as a waste disposal authority have to provide to residents that they might dispose of and deposit their waste, their household waste, what we can and can't charge for, the difference between household and non-household waste, and a brief history of the council's provision of outlets for some construction and demolition waste over time, which has culminated in this latest regulatory service change. It's also just worth me mentioning, just picking up in the report, government have started to refer to recycling household waste sites as HWRC, so household waste recycling centres. They're interchangeable for the purposes of this report, but just thought I'd mention that in case it's not clear. So point 19 of the report sets out those volumes and amounts of construction and demolition waste that the government now say fall within this free allowance for residents who generate that type of waste and have undertaken the work themselves, and confirm that the charges can be applied above those limits. Then from point 20 in the report, we explain how the scheme has been amended since the 1st of January in Leicestershire to take account of those changes. So in effect, it equates to a householder being allowed one visit per week to deposit construction and demolition waste up to their free allowance. Previous charging rates above the allowance will remain in place, so we will charge above those allowances. Similarly, the website, the permit system for asbestos and staff have all been updated and advised of the new approach, and there are currently no changes that have been made to the range of materials that we charge for. So in terms of performance, it's still really early days, so we expect lower tonnages of bricks and rubble, that sort of material, in the winter anyway, but we will monitor it across the summer. But the service anticipates that the free allowance will result in higher construction and demolition tonnages coming into the sites. We'll also see reduced charging income and increased haulage costs to move that material on to its end destination, which the government ultimately expects the council to absorb those costs. They've been really clear that there'll be no additional funding provided from central government. Obviously, that growth pressure has had to be built into the current MTFS, and that's explained in the report. In terms of next steps, I think I touched on earlier, the service intends to monitor the tonnages into the autumn, so later this year, and then we'll be able to assess whether we need any additional measures, be them changes to our permitting scheme, reconsider the scope of any materials that fall within the scheme, and then we'll obviously reconsider at that point and come back. With that, Chair, I just put the report to the committee and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Payne for additional. Thank you.
Nothing to add really. It's a legislative change that's just been identified. The report says everything we need to know, and if anyone has any questions, I'm sure Joe can answer them. Joe, hopefully getting paid per word this afternoon, per line. I think it's a good report. I think it's comprehensive. I do have a question from Councillor Chapman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a simple one, really. We're going to have this waste coming in, and some of it's going to be builders' waste, it's going to be bricks, rubble and that kind of thing. Is there any way that can be recycled and made into hardcore? Or don't we have that facility, or is that just beyond, or is it the fact is you really don't know yet because you don't know how much you're going to get coming in? So thank you, Blake.
I'm going to spare Joe on this occasion, Chairman. I actually asked that exact same question at a lead member meeting and had a very good response from one of Joe's senior officers in her department. And I was told, just bluntly speaking, the cost of processing it for on sale is greater than the cost of disposing it. And you know the financial plight to the council. We have to balance cost versus benefits. So it gets disposed of, but it's not something that we can afford to make available for general sale.
I understand rebuke, Councillor Payne. I always thought that we did actually create a mill waste, I always thought that we did recycle and make hardcore out of it. I'll pass that on to Joe. Such an urban myth that it doesn't happen. Better late than never. Nice to see you.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. And just to spare Joe, and apologies for being late to the meeting all and having to make Joe work so hard, so apologies for that. But just another one, what we tend to get in tends to be poor quality. So, any then, as Blake's absolutely saying, the cost then to make that into something as usable through the recycling process doesn't stack up in terms of business case. So it comes back to that quality as well as another factor. Just thought I'd add that point.
Thank you. Questions from members in respect to charging for construction demolition? Councillor Bolter, thank you.
The usual one, asbestos. You're going to look something up this afternoon?
I was going to look something up, Councillor Bolter. What I did do is have a look at the information that we've updated the website with. So just to be clear, in case it's not through you, Chair, in the report, it does say in the report that if you need to take asbestos to one of our designated sites, of which I think there are 3 or 4, and they're listed in the report, so you can't just take it to any of the recycling house or waste sites. You need a permit for asbestos, but it is included in the free allowance. So in effect, your 1 visit per week, you would be able to dispose of a piece of asbestos sheet or pipe, as long as it falls within the information that's on the website. And I have checked, it's all on there. It tells you sort of what the shape and size of that is. But over and above your allowance, you will be charged at £10 per sheet, as we do now with the permitting. And I had a look earlier over lunch just to double check that all of that information is up to date on the website, which it is.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Councillor Bolter. I'm slightly inclined to agree with Councillor Bolter in the respect there's some ambiguity about how big is a sheet, how much does it weigh. Sorry, Councillor Page. And there's going to be an appointee there measuring these sheets as they come in and out. Is that okay? I'm not.
You, Chair, there are the site staff for those 4 specific sites are very well trained, and they have. This is the exact term, a reference bucket on site. So if you bring, it's wrapped, etc., and it doesn't fall into a big sheet or a section of pipe for which we give the exact sort of measurements, it will give you the dimensions of, it's the equivalent of a builder's bag or whatever, but it will say that's a tub and that falls within your allowance. If above it, it falls into charging, but the site will give you direction to that information.
I kind of had a vision there, Joe, if it's like one of those things of, is it a letter or is it a parcel that you get at the post office or the airport? Yes, thank you, Councillor Seaton. Councillor Payne, thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's probably incumbent on me as a lead member just to make what may be an obvious point to elected members more generally, but there'll be a lot of members of the public that will turn up to one of our sites and will probably get very frustrated that they're being perhaps challenged or questioned by an operative. But I think my ask will be to be patient and to bear with the operative. This is a matter of legislation. The government have set the law here. It's not Leicestershire County Council setting these rules. The government have actually set the rules as to what type of material and what frequency can be disposed of at a waste and recycling site. And all we're asking our staff to do here is to make sure that the law is adhered to. So, this is one of the difficulties of this particular policy that has been introduced at the beginning of this year. It is a national change, but I do ask members of the public, to bear with us and be polite and respectful to the staff when disposing of such waste at our waste and recycling sites.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. And out of respect to Councillor Bolter, we also was discussing the ambiguity of how it's presented, how it's packaged. Is it double packaged and the like? Thank you.
And just to come back, and sorry, I should have, Councillor Bolter, just added that on. But I also, again, on the website, just for my own peace of mind, it does give you the information around double wrapping, clear polythene. It does try and steer a resident if you're unsure about how you would present that material at site and any limitations on what you should or shouldn't bring. So hopefully it's in fairly plain English. But the site staff, as Councillor Payne said, are really well, they're well versed in how to advise. And I think we've discussed it, it will be quite a few years ago, but the only other thing I would add is it's very visual deliberately at the site, a tub, a container, to give people some sort of understanding of the size. It is also because we have to navigate a piece of legislation it's to do with weights and measures, and it's linked to trading standards. Unless we have weighing equipment at our sites, and that wouldn't be practical in all cases, you cannot deem an exact weight under the Weights and Measures Act if you can't actually corroborate it. So we've always erred on the side of caution and been quite generous in the allowance, but we use the sort of visual aids at site to make it as easy as we can for residents.
No, I can't imagine the bottlenecks that we'd have at these sites if we had to start weighing things as well as double packaging them. Colleagues, in relation to the revised approach for charging and construction, which is item number 10, is there any additional questions or statements that anybody would like to make on this committee? Thank you. Fine, thank you. Which brings me on to item 11, which is the date for the next meeting. To confirm, the next meeting of this committee is scheduled to take place on Thursday, the 13th of June at 2 p.m. Item 11, as stated earlier, there are no urgent items. I personally, as representative chairman, would like to thank the officers for their flexibility and mitigation of circumstances, and thank you, Joe, for stepping in. Very noble. And I'd like to thank you all for attending this meeting. I declare the meeting closed and I wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.